Wes is with Pacific Historic Parks, which is the park's nonprofit partner, which is allowing us to have this wonderful speaker series and hosting our speaker series. So, thank you to PHP and to Wes for providing our technical assistance in the background and helping us to also navigate some of the Q&A sessions as well. So, thanks very much for that, Wes and PHP. So, welcome everyone. I am so thrilled and excited to be able to bring you Jeff and Mary as our speakers for this kickoff speaker series. My name is Christine O'Gray, and I'm the superintendent of Honouliuli National Historic Site. For those of you who might not be familiar, Honouliuli is the largest and longest used incarceration camp during World War II in the Hawaiian Islands. It is this year, since it was established as a national park 10 years ago on February 24th, 2015. And I'm thrilled to be able to welcome Jeff Burton and Mary Farrell, who were the instrumental archaeologists who led to the establishment of the park. And so it is our honor that they are actually kicking off our speaker series this year. And we will have virtual speakers every month through January. We are using the whole year to commemorate 10 years since the park was established. And each month will be dedicated to a theme, educating about different aspects of the camp and the park itself. We'll also have special in-person activities, and I'll share a little bit more about that at the end of the talk. But with that, I will definitely start with our wonderful speakers today. So Jeff Burton and the person who said that they had been to Manzanar, you will appreciate this introduction. He is the National Park Service's Culture Resources Manager at Manzanar National Historic Site in California, where he has been doing archaeology almost since it was established in 1992. Jeff has also led work at other Japanese American World War II incarceration sites, and Jeff and Mary's 2001 nationwide overview of incarceration sites was cited in the national law that created the Japanese American Confinement Sites Grant Program. Mary herself is a retired Forest Service archaeologist and led an effort to honor Gordon Hirabayashi and other Japanese Americans who resisted the unconstitutional mass incarceration. From 2007 to 2017, Jeff and Mary conducted archaeological studies at the Honouliuli internment and POW camp. A lot of people think that archaeologists like to work at the oldest sites or the best preserved sites, but Jeff and Mary claim that uncovering the recent past can be even more rewarding, especially when that archaeology can help bring recognition and acknowledgement of little known but important histories. And with that, I will hand it over to Mary and Jeff.
Oh, thank you, Christine. Jeff and I were very happy you asked us to talk about the archaeology of Honouliuli. It's not an easy place to work, but it's an important place to work as an internment camp, as a POW camp, and as an archaeological site. So first, I want to give a little background about the mainland internment. When the Japanese Empire attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, rumors spread that the Hawaiian Japanese had aided and abetted the attack. Such stories weren't true, of course, but even back then, fake news was a powerful force with real political consequences. On February 19th, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which allowed the military to designate areas from which any or all persons may be excluded. Although the executive order did not specify who would be excluded or from what areas they would be excluded, in practice, it was applied almost exclusively to Japanese Americans on the mainland's west coast and parts of Arizona. On the mainland, 120,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry, most of them American citizens, were forced from their homes and businesses along the west coast, and most were imprisoned for the duration of the war. They were moved first to assembly centers, which were makeshift confinement sites, sometimes in fairgrounds, and then 10 specially built relocation centers, which were originally also called concentration camps. The 10 so-called relocation centers were all pretty much the same. with rows and rows of barracks surrounded by fences and guard towers. Up to 10 people would be assigned to a single room in one of the barracks, and each barracks had 4 to 6 rooms. Communal toilets, showers, and mess halls were shared by every 14 barracks. Another common characteristic of the mainland relocation centers is that families were incarcerated together for the most part, with the exception of those community leaders who had been arrested and whisked away in the days following the December 7th attack. By the time the relocation took place, military intelligence studies had already determined that the Japanese American population did not pose a military threat. But sometimes it's hard for the United States government to change direction. Okay, you see photos of incarcerated children and orphans and Blue Star families, many of whom had lost someone in the war. It's easy to see it wasn't our country's finest idea. The relocation had no legal or military basis either. In the 1980s, a government commission found that it had been motivated by racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and failed political leadership. Besides the enormous material losses to those who had been incarcerated, the commission report also cited long-lasting intangible results, including lost education and job opportunities, loss of family structure, and prolonged racial stigma and trauma. The Civil Liberties Act of 1988 acknowledged the injustice and apologized for the internment. For most Americans, this large-scale abrogation of civil rights has become a cautionary tale, an example of a mistake we do not want to make again. Some of the former incarceration sites have been designated National Historic Sites precisely to convey this message. Manzanar National Historic Site is visited by over 100,000 people a year. An incarceration site in Idaho has been declared Minidoka National Monument. One in Colorado is now Amachi National Historic Site. Another incarceration site at Tule Lake, California, is a national monument. Heart Mountain in Wyoming is a National Historic Landmark. And former Japanese American incarceration sites on Indian reservations in Arizona are preserved by tribes. Preservation and interpretation efforts are in place or underway at several other of the mainland sites. This history is still not routinely taught in schools, but scores of books have been published about the mainland Japanese American experience, and the mass incarceration has been featured in movies and art. What about Hawaii? It was long thought that Hawaii avoided the unconstitutional catastrophe that occurred on the mainland. Nearly 158,000 persons of Japanese ancestry lived in Hawaii, and although estimates vary, fewer than 2,400 Nikkei in Hawaii were taken into custody during the war. You might assume that because the military selected less than 2% of the Japanese Americans in Hawaii for incarceration, they carefully and scrupulously interned only those who presented a legitimate threat. Or you might think, given that Hawaii was within the war arena and had been directly attacked by Japan, that maybe whatever measures taken there in the name of military necessity were truly justified. But those who studied the history came to a different conclusion. Martial law exerted strict military control over the entire population in Hawaii. Two historians wrote that martial law in Hawaii involved a complete suspension of constitutional liberties for an entire civilian population. There is abundant evidence that civilians from all ethnic groups were subjected to arbitrary and humiliating treatment. One official wrote as early as in December 1942, "While fighting for democracy on a dozen fronts, we have dictatorship quite needlessly almost by accident, in one vital part of the United States of America. Internment in Hawaii, though more selective and more limited than on the mainland, was used to intimidate the population. Those who were incarcerated were more often than not simply leaders in their communities. As with the Japanese Americans' World War II mass incarceration on the mainland, U.S. school history books don't discuss this abdication of civil rights. Like the treatment of Native Americans and African Americans, it does not fit with our image of ourselves as the good guys, nor with the constitutional ideals of justice and equality. Jeff and I became aware of the history of Hawaiian internment thanks to Jane Kurihara and Betsy Young. We had already published an overview of the physical remains of the mainland camps, confinement, and ethnicity that Christine had mentioned. Jane met with Jeff at an Arkansas conference about Japanese American internment and convinced him to come take a look at the internment sites the Japanese Cultural Center had identified in Hawaii. The Cultural Center's all-volunteer team, led by Jane and Betsy, had found unpublished manuscripts and contemporary reports, photographs, descriptions, and even objects made during the incarceration. One of the most valuable resources they had found from the archaeological perspective were 4 photographs in a book published in 1949, Waipahu at War by R.H. Lodge. JCCH later found 10 more of his photographs at Hawaii's plantation village. The photos show overviews of the camp with acres of POW tents, wooden internee huts, mess hall buildings, fences, guard towers. Lodge had worked for the Oahu Sugar Company, where Honouliuli was located, and some of his photos show POWs working in the fields. Based on an oral history, JCCH searched for and found the physical location of Honouliuli. It was then owned by Campbell Estate, later sold to Monsanto, Hawaii. But it did not look like the R.H. Lodge photographs. The valley had a road going down into it to a water building and wells, but most of the valley was covered with thick guinea grass and haole-koa, as well as acacia and Chinese banyan trees. The landowners cultivated the flat plains above the gulch, but not the gulch itself. Jane and Betsy were able to confirm that they were in the right place by comparing the landscape to historic photos. Likewise, when Jeff visited with them in 2006, he noted several remnants of the World War II prison camp. For instance, a rock wall seen in some of the historic photographs is still present. The concrete slab that JCCH had noted could be identified as a mess hall foundation. The aqueduct visible in historic pictures is still present. And parts of a water pipe clearly visible in the historic photograph can be still seen in the brush. All this indicated that Honouliuli had what people in the historic preservation field call integrity. That means you can still see traces of the events that happened there. Archaeologists call those traces features, and features can be buildings, fences, roads, trash dumps, foundations of buildings that are long gone, or aqueducts or pipelines. In 2008, the Cultural Center, with the help of several partners, sponsored a more detailed survey. The goal was to gather enough information to determine if Honouliuli should be nominated for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. The National Register is a list of places considered worthy of preservation. Listing confers a special status and recognition of a site's importance. But to be eligible for listing, a site has to have proven integrity. By that they mean there needs to be visible elements or remnants of the event that made the place important. To do that, we had to document what was left at the site. During the 2008 fieldwork, we used the historic photos to estimate where we might be able to find features in the thick vegetation. Volunteers were recruited by the Cultural Center and the University of Hawaii. The vegetation was so thick, we sometimes found features with our feet rather than with our eyes. We'd be walking along and wouldn't realize we were on or near a World War II foundation till we fell off of it or bumped into it. We did find several features during the 2008 fieldwork, but one of the best results came later. The JCCH had arranged some publicity about the fieldwork, and Jeff was invited to give a talk about the results at Iolani Palace. After the talk, the archaeologist who worked for the military at Schofield Barracks came up to us to tell us he had found an Army blueprint of Honouliuli. The blueprint focuses on the camp sewer system. It doesn't have a date, but features are labeled existing and proposed waste disposal facilities. So you can conclude from that it was made sometime after the camp had been established and after it was determined that the original sewage system was inadequate. That also tells you something about the living conditions there. The blueprint also depicts many buildings and the internal boundaries between the compounds. The blueprint inspired additional survey in 2009. Again, volunteers were recruited. Dr. Suzanne Falgu of the University of Hawaii West Oahu and some of our anthropology students volunteered. And together we realized that Honouliuli would be a good setting for archaeology field classes. Again, we used the Army blueprint and historic photos to select survey locations. Our intent was not to uncover every feature at Honouliuli, but rather to estimate how much was left at the site. We wanted to know if the blueprint was an accurate predictor of where features would be. And we wanted to know what conditions the features were in. And we wanted to describe, draw, and map a sample of different features for the National Register nomination. We discovered that there was a lot more left at Honouliuli than one might guess from first glance, including latrine floors and septic tanks that were shown on the blueprint. Dr. Falgu helped set up field classes at Honouliuli in 2010, 2011, and 2014. We tried to give the students a variety of field experiences, including mapping with a total station, looking for artifacts with a metal detector, using trowels and shovels to uncover features. The students used the historic photos and blueprint to assess where features were likely to be. And when they found something, they collected measurements and photographs so the features could be mapped. They also contributed their own knowledge and experience, asking and answering their own research questions. Together, the students and JCCH volunteers continued finding and documenting historic features, including features not shown on the blueprints, such as the sidewalk. We were able to uncover the foundation for a generator building and verify that one of the structures still standing in 2009 originally dated to World War II, even though it had been used more recently as part of a chicken farm. Artifacts included bottles and military-issued dish fragments, many of the features related to the infrastructure, including water pipes, laundry sinks, and sewer system access points. But the feature at lower left, it's hard to see, but that looks like a small ornamental pond. We even found some of the security lights visible in historic photographs. One internee, Dan Nishikawa, had made drawings while he was interned, and we were able to match up some of the buildings he depicts with foundations and features. The commanding officer's description of the camp provides details that help interpret the photographs and the archaeological features. Each of the 3 mess halls was equipped to feed up to 1,000 people a day. The Swedish vice consul's report makes the place sound idyllic. The internees present in 1943, he said, busied themselves with planting of trees and shrubs, arranging flower beds with rock borders, and otherwise embellishing their surroundings with the materials at hand. The lanes between the row of cottages have been graded, and through the voluntary efforts of their occupants and nature's general response, the cottages now are surrounded by green lawns, shrubs, and flowers, also young trees. But oral histories contradict the vice consul's rosy portrait of the camp. For internees, the pain and humiliation of being interned was exacerbated by the physical discomfort of mosquitoes and excessive heat. Boredom was oppressive, and many worked on gardening, landscape, or crafts to pass the time. The search for one of the guard towers visible in a lodge photograph shows how the historic photos were critical to finding traces of the camp in the dense vegetation. We could see from one of the photos that the highlighted guard tower was located along a road near what appeared to be a road junction. Those roads were eroded and overgrown, but we could still figure out where they were. We used probes, shovels, and trowels to explore the area and found the 4 concrete footings for the guard tower. The guard towers themselves were just little wooden rooms on long legs, but they had to be well anchored into the ground. So each of the 4 posts was set into concrete. Each footing is made of concrete poured into a roughly circular shaped hole around the rectangular post that formed one of the guard tower legs. What you see archaeologically is just 4 rectangular post holes. The students made a feature drawing of the foundation blocks, showing the legs were about 6 feet apart. The post hole indicated the lumber used for the legs was about 5 inches by 8 inches, but the sizes varied enough to suggest that irregular or recycled lumber was used. Guard towers are pretty emblematic of prison camps, and finding that first guard tower foundation inspired us to look for more, like the one that is barely shown at the bottom of the same lodge photograph. The photograph suggested the guard tower was at or near the aqueduct, so that is where we started looking. January 21, 1943, had been written in concrete along the aqueduct rim, and the excavation revealed that the guard tower had straddled that inscription. The concrete with the date had been placed to close off what had been an overflow gate along the aqueduct, so prisoners couldn't escape through that water gate. This guard tower's legs were made of lumber about 4 by 6 inches in size, a little bit bigger square. Footings for another guard tower were found along the aqueduct, and this time the concrete had a name and date inscribed, R. in Hotchkiss, 8/13/43. One of the UH West Oahu students, Linda Maldonado, discovered more information about Roland Neal Hotchkiss for her class project. Hotchkiss had enlisted at Camp Blanding, Florida on April 29, 1942, but his records were among the millions of service records catastrophically destroyed by fire in 1973. Hotchkiss died in 1955 in Florida and was buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Linda Maldonado realized the fact that he was buried at Arlington indicates he either retired from the military or was medically disabled. She figured the latter was more likely because he died before he could have served the minimum 20 years required for retirement. This is an example of how the vegetation makes doing archaeology or any work at Honouliuli a bit serendipitous. After we had discovered the guard tower along the aqueduct, we took a break on the slope of the hill. One of the students said, "Hey, I think I'm sitting on flat rock." Turns out there was a whole staircase that led up to the guard tower. We excavated it, found some artifacts, and mapped the staircase. And when we returned 2 years later, it was completely covered by vegetation. You couldn't tell it was there. We also excavated some standard 1x1 meter units with the help of a volunteer-conducted metal detector survey in one of the prisoner compounds where we knew there would be no large concrete slab foundations to find. Here we were looking for small items that might have been lost or changes in soil that would indicate the 1940s ground surface. I don't know if you can see, but in that central picture, there is a layer of lighter colored soil that we determined was from ground coral shells that had been placed there to make pathways. Jeff was able to plot all the features we had found on the blueprint from Schofield Barracks. He added all the buildings you can see in the historic photographs too. The results of the surveys at Honouliuli provided the basis for a National Register nomination, and it was listed as nationally significant in 2012. Coincidentally, the regional director of the National Park Service in the Pacific at that time at Honolulu when we were working there was formerly the superintendent at Manzanar National Historic Site. So he was well aware of the importance of physical sites to interpret history. Frank Hayes met with the Cultural Center and Monsanto to discuss the potential for National Historic Site status. Congress then passed legislation authorizing a study to determine if it should become a National Park Service unit. The collaboration of University of Hawaii West Oahu faculty that began in 2009 resulted in a publication in 2014. It's a collection of articles authorized by the University of Hawaii West Oahu faculty from 8 different academic disciplines and scholars and community partners from the JCCH, National Park Service, and others. The research looks at the historical, sociological, political, psychological, archaeological, and cultural aspects and impacts of World War II confinement in Honouliuli. The researchers used oral histories, archival collections, and fieldwork. 3 of our field archaeology class students also contributed their research results. A compilation of the work that Jeff and I did at Honouliuli is available online at academia.edu. We also recommend this article written by Bill Belcher, Suzanne Falgu, and their colleagues. Bill led additional field classes at Honouliuli from 2016 to 2019. Also available online, it very eloquently illustrates how archaeology can contribute to discussions of social justice and democratic principles. So, over the course of almost 2 decades, by working together, researchers, volunteers, landowners, University of Hawaii, preservation groups, and the news media have brought the Honouliuli site out of obscurity. I think the commemorations held at the site show how important the place where something happened is to our individual and group memory. Another important thing Don't underestimate the power of people working together. Physically, Honouliuli is really the most miserable site I've ever worked at. It was called Jigoku Dani by the internees, which translate to Hell Valley. That is not an exaggeration. For a place located in paradise, it is hot, brushy, muggy, and buggy. But all these people came together to uncover its history, and they made the work especially meaningful and especially fun. Personally, I think it's invigorating and inspiring to be around people who think that history and civil rights are important. As the Park Service develops Honouliuli into a place the public can visit, the site will help provide deeper understanding of some of the lesser known events of World War II. A better understanding of the personal, social, political, and moral cost of incarcerating civilians should come in handy as our country faces new challenges to civil rights. When President Obama designated Honouliuli a national monument 10 years ago, he said it would be, quote, a place to reflect on wartime experiences and recommit ourselves to the pursuit of freedom and justice. You might think that goal sounds too lofty to apply to work that involved wading through guinea grass and uncovering latrine foundations. But I think it fits the archaeological investigations conducted at the site too. Archaeology helps unleash Honouliuli's power of place by allowing people to see and touch the remains of the structures the military built to confine and manage the prisoners, as well as modifications made by the prisoners themselves and the artifacts they left behind. The archaeology proved that Honouliuli had enough traces of its World War II history to warrant listing on the National Register. But it was a big leap from National Register listing to designation as a National Historic Monument and National Historic Site. I haven't seen the full schedule, but I hope a future presentation will tell us about all the work that went into those designations. Okay, now we have some time for questions.
Great. Thank you, Mary. And I'll just highlight a couple things that you shared with folks. So yes, our in-person kickoff event at the Japanese Cultural Center of Hawaii yesterday, we did have a panel session comprised of all the key folks that really helped to make the park possible. Carol Hayashino, who was then the president and executive director of JCCH, really led the effort to establish Honouliuli's National Historic or National Park Service unit. Really had some wonderful backstories to share about what went into creating the park, and David Lassner, president of UH, really told some interesting ways that UH West Oahu joined to make the park possible with regard to access. It wasn't going to be possible to make it a park unless there was a commitment for public access at some point in the future. So he is the one that literally signed a commitment by the university to provide that access. And they had such wonderful stories that I am hoping, I talked to Carol afterward, and I'm hoping that she's going to join our speaker series because people just wanted to hear more about the backstories, and she was just a wonderful speaker. So I am going to entice her to come on as one of our virtual speakers and be able to share more of her stories. So absolutely. A couple other things just to let you know, folks out there. To let you know that some of the books that Mary had just mentioned, some of the work that her and Jeff had done, we do have that on the park's website under recommended reading, linked to be able to download for free. Breaking the Silence It's currently out of print, but we do have books available. We're partnering with Kaimuki's to Shop, and they have copies of that book if folks are interested, as well as the park is actually establishing its bookstore. We're being co-located with the Pearl Harbor National Memorial Bookstore as well. So we will have that book available at the Pearl Harbor bookstore as well. So I did just want to mention a couple of those items. And the last item that I'll mention that Mary, you touched upon is just some of the books that you mentioned in the beginning of how there's not a lot of books written about the Japanese American story and incarceration here in Hawaii. And I'll just note that as part of the 10th anniversary, we're trying to bring more of those books to light. So folks might be interested. I actually see two of our book authors on this talk today. So Gail Okawa has written about her family's incarceration history from Hawaii. And so she'll be one of our book authors at Pearl Harbor as well later this year. And then Sharon Fujimoto Johnson, her grandfather was held at Honouliuli, and two of her books are coming out actually next month. And she will be here in Hawaii in September as part of National Literacy Month. And she'll be at several bookstores at Barnes and also at the shop in Kaimuki as well. So folks will have an opportunity to learn more about those local stories and meet directly some of the authors who've written those books as well as part of the 10th anniversary. So with that, I will, yes, open it up for some questions. If folks have questions for Mary, just put them in the questions chat, or if you want to chat it to me directly, I'm happy to do that. I actually have a question I'd like to start with, Mary. So I candidly admit I'm not a baseball fan myself, but I learned last week that Hawaii has quite a claim to fame to American baseball in that Alexander Cartwright, who apparently is the father of baseball and has quite a history here in Hawaii. Though he was a New Yorker, he moved here and started a business. And he is considered the father of baseball in that he created the Diamond baseball field in New York. And when he moved here, he did create the first baseball field in Hawaii that it's still apparently in operation and used. And I was told by a baseball fan that it's the oldest baseball field in the world. It's in Makiki. If folks from Hawaii know, it's at the end of Keaumoku as you're crossing over to the bridge. Maka, it's to the right. But apparently he is buried here at Oahu Cemetery, and baseball fans come every year to commemorate his birthday and lay baseball memorabilia around his grave. And so I do know that there was a baseball field at Honouliuli, and I was wondering if you knew anything about that, Mary.
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of research that could be done to find out more about that. The baseball field was located near the guards compound and near the compound 7 where the Koreans were held. So we don't know if it was used by prisoners or only by the guards, and what kind of access the prisoners might have had to that. But there might be information out there that could help us find that out.
That's great. Thank you, Mary. Do you have any kind of backstories that you can share through all your work in all of this?
Well, the first time I went to El Valley, I was hoping it would be the last. It was so awful. You could lean back in the grass and not fall over because that guinea grass was so tall and so strong. It was just it. I don't know if it still is, but at that time it was very difficult to walk around. But the thing that for me was so wonderful was that so many people came out to volunteer, and the students, they seemed to have a blast, and the volunteers had a good time. And I think it was because we felt we were doing something important. We were uncovering this history that was not very well known. And so I think to me that is the big lesson of Honouliuli, that you can be miserable and still have fun and do good.
Great. So we do have a couple of questions here as well. So Is there a list of POWs that can be reviewed? My father-in-law was saved by U.S. soldiers and transported to Honouliuli. He told me about his involvement building a medical clinic on Hickam Air Force Base.
Wow, I don't know. I think the Cultural Center might have some information on that because there were attempts to tally the internees, and I would guess that the military would have records on the POWs too, but I don't have that information.
I do know that for the Korean side of the POWs, there is a list, and we actually do have that on the park's website under the POW section. There was funding that was funded to find the Korean POWs. So there is a list of the Korean POWs. But as Mary said, this is one of many areas that we still have to do a lot more research and explore. Because I had also another gentleman that had contacted me looking for his Italian grandfather, which he does believe, who he believes might have been held at Honouliuli. And so, right now, for those types of historical records, the National Archives is also a great place to look as well.
I know one of your future speakers, Kaori Akiyama, is going to, I think, talk about some of the Okinawan POWs that were held at Honouliuli.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for reminding me. Yes, absolutely. We're dedicating the month of July to uncover information about the Okinawan POWs. So, if this person posing the question would like to join that and maybe talk and ask that question, she might be able to help point you in some other areas as well. Um, I think another question here is just given your work and Jeff's work across all the different confinement sites. I mean, you touched upon this a little bit, but what are some of the similarities? I mean, you touched a little bit upon some of maybe the differences for Honouliuli, but what are some of the similarities of other Japanese American confinement sites that you feel Honouliuli shares?
One thing that stands out to me is how the incarcerated Japanese Americans tried to improve their prison. I mean, in most every case on the mainland, and certainly at Manzanar, where Jeff works, they went to great lengths to kind of convert the prison atmosphere to something that was, I don't know, was more bearable for their families. I mean, people built gardens and did landscaping to cut down the dust, but also just to give their kids a place to play. And you saw that from the Swedish vice consul's report that there was a lot of landscaping going on too in the Japanese American compound at Honouliuli. We found in some cases pathways, rockline pathways, and that hard to see photo of the coral, probably from them making marking pathways, which would be pretty nice to have white pathways if you had to get up in the middle of the night to go find a latrine or something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. The other thing is that the archaeology is a different kind of archaeology. The in most archaeologists think that they're going to be brushing things off with a little dental pick or something, and at some sites like Manzanar and Honouliuli, the recent sediments are covering up the features that are just 80 years old, and so you have to do more, I'd say, vigorous kind of excavation to uncover some of these features that show what was there.
So another question here asks, what do you think are the future archaeological needs or work that needs to be done at Honouliuli?
There's still an awful lot covered up, and I think just the questions that you ask about the baseball field or or what did they do to improve the surroundings? I think there's a lot of stuff that could be done. One thing, kind of silly, but I'd like to know, there's so many fences in that area. What fences were part of the original security fences and which were added later when the area was used for cattle grazing?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of features that we did not find, that we didn't have time to look for. In the work that we did, we were pretty limited by Monsanto had restrictions on how much time we could spend in the gulch. I think the first year it was only 2 days and then maybe 3 days. So there's still a whole lot of field work that could be done.
Hmm. So, a question that I'm going to ask you actually is that folks may not know on the call here today is that both Jeff, and Mary also led archaeological work on other islands for finding other Japanese American confinement sites. And I should take a step back and say, though it was a majority Japanese Americans, there were actually European Americans that were also held at Honouliuli. So, but there were places on all the islands where U.S. citizens were arrested after Pearl Harbor was attacked. And so they ran everything from, community halls to actual prisons where people had to actually share U.S. citizens had to actually share the jail cells with actual convicted prisoners. And so could you share a little bit about that work, Mary?
Boy, that was really fascinating. And that's another publication or a report that is available online. The just I was so impressed by the resilience of the people that were incarcerated, and their stories are kind of horrific. Being picked up because maybe their neighbor said they violated a blackout order or something, or because they were uh, worked at a radio station. That there's, I think I haven't checked thoroughly, but there now is available a lot of books that tell these stories that show how really crazy some of this martial law stuff and the people that were picked up for absolutely no reason. As you mentioned, some were German Americans. Uh, Doris Berg Nye has some great stories about not great in the happy sense, but great in the miserable sense about how her parents were picked up and she and her siblings were just left alone, not knowing what happened to them. So I think just there's so much good literature and other oral histories that can tell you some good stories about that. For us, it was amazing to see what kind of facilities people were kept in. Like maybe, like you said, it could be a regular prison with other prisoners, or it could be one guy was held in a gymnasium shower room. It was just, you don't think stuff like that can happen in America, but boy, howdy.
Uh, so I think I have another question. It's probably more for me. What is the long-term goal for Honouliuli? Will it be open to the public as an education center? So I'm actually glad you asked that question because part of the 10th anniversary, so I will actually be the feature speaker for April, and I'll be giving a park update. It's on April 23rd at 6 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. A part of that update I can share today with that question is that where is Honouliuli headed into the future? And one of the things I'm really excited to share with everybody is that the park is actually starting its general management plan. And so every park has a GMP in which this is the plan that basically guides management of the park. And so this year is the kickoff pre planning year for that park process. It is a multi year process. So if you go to the park's website under Get Involved, you'll see a planning page, and you can find a little bit more information about that. But in essence, we definitely will be going out to communities and the public to get your um, ideas in terms of what is it that you want this park to be in terms of public use, as the person just asking the question asked. Public use, what will the access look like? What will the facilities related to the park look like? And for those of you who may not be familiar, the reason why Honouliuli is not open to the general public, like Pearl Harbor, our sister park on Oahu, is that the park does not own any lands that connect it to a public roadway. Therefore, we work very closely with our adjacent landowners to be able to provide limited access to the park for educational opportunities. One side is Bayer Hawaii, which did buy Monsanto, and the other side is the University of Hawaii West Oahu. So it's not that people can't go to the park, but it's not a situation like Pearl Harbor where people can just drive up to it and go themselves. So it does work. It does require coordination with landowners. I am hoping to be able to, as part of the 10th, later on this year, work to provide some limited general public tours as part of the 10th anniversary. So check back to the park's website when that becomes available, but I am working very closely with both landowners to be able to provide that type of limited opportunity. And I must say that they are both very, very supportive partners from the beginning. It was Bayer Hawaii who donated the initial 123 acres to the park to establish it, and we are currently in conversations with them as they are donating to the park an additional 22 acres. And UH West Oahu has been a wonderful partner as well in a lot of the education, as Mary intimated, partnering with their students to do the archaeological work. And they've just been, and Breaking the Silence, a book, and coming out with that. And they continue to be a really strong partner because they too are committed and see the important history and the lessons that need to continue to be shared about what happened at Honouliuli. So I'm very lucky to work with two very committed landowners to be able to provide that access and education opportunity. So I think another question, I think we might make this the last question, just looking at the time, and then I'll share a little bit about what more we have planned for next month. Was there another POW camp on Oahu? I believe there was one. Yes. So there were other POW camps on Oahu. There were 13 in total, including Honouliuli. And I, at some point, we will have that information in the park's website as well. But there's a list, I believe it's in the Breaking the Silence book, where it lists all the other POW camps on Oahu, but there were many others as well. And so in addition to Honouliuli, the POWs there, sadly enough, another layer of kind of unfortunate history to Honouliuli is they were majority conscripted laborers from Okinawa and Korea, people that were forced to join the Japanese army. But of course, there were the Axis country POWs from Italy and Japan as well, held at Honouliuli. So with that, I will go ahead and maybe wrap us up and thank Jeff and Mary and Jeff's excellent work. This has been recorded. So if your friends or colleagues missed it, it will be provided as a link on the park's website as well once we finish in a couple more days. So with that, I do want to go ahead and share with folks kind of what's on tap for, let's see, April. And I'm also trying to figure out, let's see, everyone in the meeting, how to send this information to everyone. So the best thing to do is always go to the park's website, which I'm putting in the chat right now for all the latest information and how to register for the talks. So April is actually National Poetry Month. And so Mary talked about how the threat of boredom was one of the really challenging things for people who were incarcerated at Honouliuli, where they did write poems. And we are dedicating the month of April as National Poetry Month to highlight some of those poems. Some ways you can participate in that is that We are partnering with Hawaii's Plantation Village, which has also an excellent exhibit on Honouliuli as well. We are holding a workshop there with folks who've written poems about Honouliuli, and being led the workshop itself. You will have an opportunity to create your own poems, and the workshop is being led by the state poet laureate Brandy McDougall. So that'll be exciting, along with some of her colleagues at the University of Hawaii, who are great poets in their own right. And so that is an event. And though not in the event of April, we are also holding a poetry reading at Barnes on May 10th. Sharon, who's on the call, part of her poems that she wrote about Honouliuli is part of a anthology of poetry called The Gates of Memory, and that poem is actually that anthology is created all by poems made by folks, descendants of those who were incarcerated in these various Japanese American confinement sites. So Richard Hamasaki is a local poet, though his relative was not at Honouliuli. His relative was confined on the Continental confinement site, and so he will be at Barnes and Nobles with this book doing a poetry reading on May 10th as well. So those are just some of the poetry related events for April. In addition to that, in April, we are joining with our partners at the Boy Scouts, local Boy Scouts chapter here in Hawaii, and they're going to have an Ellison Onizuka Day at UH West Oahu, and they are going to be, we have been invited to have a table there as well, so we will be joining that wonderful day with youth and students. And the other great day that we're joining is also on the same day of April 5th, the Hawaii History Day is having their statewide finalists announced at Hawaii History Day. So we will also be there as well with youth and students and teachers educating about this history at Honouliuli. So those are some of the events that we have planned for April. And again, if you go to the park's website, you will find all the latest information on that. So again, I really thank everybody for joining us on a Sunday, no less, and taking time out of your weekend to hear directly from instrumental archaeologists Mary and Jeff, who were, as you heard, so instrumental in the archaeological work they did. That this is what led to the national park being established. So we will continue to be working with Mary and Jeff as well as we continue some of the archaeological work into the future. So thank you to both Jeff and Mary for Pacific Historic Parks for sponsoring this virtual speaker series, and all of you for taking the time to learn about Honouliuli and joining us on this Sunday afternoon. Please share the 10th information broadly and widely with your communities as we are trying to get the word out and educate as many people as possible about the important history here at Honouliuli. So thank you everybody again, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.